a woman wanders alone into the darkness. It's a common sight on the seedy strip of this California town. Addicts, prostitutes, and other streetwalkers. This mother's mentally ill daughter was among them and came to her in 2012 with a startling accusation.
One day she said, "I'm having sex with a cop." I went, "You're what?" She said, "I'm having sex with this cop." I went, "What do you mean?" What do you mean? And she's like, "Oh, nothing." And then she played it off and she didn't say anything more. And I kind of pushed her, and then she's like, "Well, he makes me have sex with him."
She says that cop was Sergio Alvarez, a patrol officer on the overnight shift, one who'd once taken an oath to protect and serve his hometown. The Associated Press has found that Alvarez is far from the only law enforcement officer accused of sexual misconduct. An AP investigation uncovered about 1,000 cases in a recent 6-year period where those officers have been stripped of their police licenses because of rape or other sexual misconduct. And there are undoubtedly more, since some states, including California and New York, don't decertify officers for misconduct, and 3 states didn't hand over their records. Sergio Alvarez cruised the streets of West Sacramento in search of victims, often calling into police dispatch looking for dirt to hold over their heads.
She's clear. Were you expecting her at something else?
Like probation or something.
Negative probation.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. Bye.
Even when he found no reason to hold them, prosecutors say Alvarez drove his victims to places like this dark alley, where he raped them or forced them to perform oral sex in exchange for their freedom.
As in any profession, you have some bad actors. In this case, it was one officer, and he committed some horrific acts on extremely vulnerable women, and he paid the price.
Local news followed Alvarez's trial and sentence, one of the harshest handed down to an officer in the AP investigation.
Today, Alvarez was given 205 years to life following his conviction on sexual assault and kidnapping charges.
Alvarez, now in prison in Southern California and appealing the conviction, didn't respond to an AP request for an interview. His attorneys also refused comment. But the town's new police chief, who took over after Alvarez's arrest, doesn't mince words.
There was no weeping. No tears in West Sacramento Police Department the day that sentencing came down.
Like chiefs across the country, Tom McDonald hopes more supervision, including body cameras, will help prevent future misconduct. But he also wants his officers to police one another.
That it's an expectation that if they see something that's inappropriate, they need to stand up.
His city recently agreed to pay $4.1 million to 6 victims who filed civil lawsuits. Other departments across the country are facing similar suits. They include the case of a former police intern in Las Cruces, New Mexico, Diana Guerrero. At age 17, she was sexually assaulted by a former sex crimes detective, Michael Garcia, now serving 9 years in federal prison.
I questioned life, I questioned religion, I questioned the law, I questioned everything. I could not understand what happened. It happened so fast, and literally it was the worst day of my life.
Guerrero, no longer sure she wants to be a police officer, now suffers from PTSD. In California, Heatherlyn Bevard also worries about her daughter, who did not speak on camera because of her deteriorated mental state.
She doesn't know what to do. She's afraid. She thinks she needs protecting from the police when they're supposed to be the ones protecting her. Sorry.
It is a betrayal by the badge that will be difficult to overcome.
Mayada Abdul Rani and her children found shelter here after Islamic militants overran Mosul and the neighboring villages. As a Christian, she was forced to make a stark decision: convert to Islam or face execution. Now, she told us, she doesn't trust any Muslims. They recruit and train kids like mine to behead people, she said. How could I ever live with those people? It was difficult to live with them before ISIS. Now, it's impossible. Like thousands of others, she fled to the village of Al-Kush, where the entire population is Christian. The site is also home to the St. Hormuz Monastery, carved out of the mountain, its origins dating back to the 7th century. It's one of the oldest symbols of Christianity in this region, and as ISIS has forced Christians out of Mosul and surrounding villages below, it's becoming one of the last. For the thousands of Christian refugees, it's not just ISIS, known here as Daesh, that keeps them from going back. Father Ghazwan Baho told us people were shocked by the betrayal of Muslim neighbors they'd known for generations.
You can see it on the news, the web, and in the headlines almost every day. Religious liberty is under serious assault in America. As Paul Strand reports, those who fight to keep that right fear it could be lost in the next 5 years, along with so much more Americans hold dear.
You've probably felt Christians are under attack more than ever before in the U.S. Now those fighting back have evidence it may actually be worse than you feared. They recently gathered in the nation's capital to sound the alarm.
We've actually had the calls to our office requesting, representation have increased by over 400% since that Supreme Court decision on same-sex marriage.
We were founded by men and women fleeing religious oppression and coming to this land to avoid precisely what is happening now.
Religious rights lawyer Kelly Shackelford heads up the Liberty Institute. It compiles a list each year of new religious hostility cases reported in America. 2 years ago, it totaled 1,600 cases.
Just in the last 2 years alone, that has increased by over 133%.
These folks on the battle's forefront warn much more is on the line here than a few people's religious sensibilities getting bruised.
The founders called religious freedom our first freedom for a reason. They knew that if you lost religious freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms. So when you see this explosion of attacks on religious freedom, it's a sign that your country's in trouble.
So much trouble, Shackelford's making a dire prediction.
I've been doing this for over a quarter century. We're either going to lose religious freedom or we're going to save it in the next 5 years.
Most of these attacks come from people who feel Christianity is so intolerant, some of its practices must be suppressed. But Shackelford thinks it's these attackers showing intolerance.
I think when you see these things happening, it's because somebody's intolerant, they don't respect religious freedom, and they think that they want to use the power of the government to force somebody to violate their conscience and faith. I think most Americans believe that's wrong, and it is.
Ironically, the very thing being suppressed is what this Christian lawyer says could save the nation.
The true answer, if you're going to turn your country around, is religious expression, is people sharing the truth that changes lives and that could change the whole country.
The attacks on a Houston non-discrimination law were relentless and effective,
simply by claiming to be a woman that day,
helping turn out voters in an off-year election to defeat Proposition 1.
It took a number of people and a number of pastors from black churches, white churches, brown churches, everyone to stand up and say, Mayor, not in our city.
This was a campaign of fear-mongering and deliberate lies.
The Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, otherwise known as HERO, was championed by the city's openly gay mayor, Annise Parker. Passed by the city council, HERO increased protections for gay and transgendered people, as well as anti-discrimination provisions based on sex, race, age, and religion.
But here in Houston, veterans can be discriminated against just because they served in the military.
But a lawsuit put the measure on the ballot, where Prop 1 opponents won more than 60% of the vote. The No campaign targeted conservatives and black churchgoers.
These are the voters who were most susceptible. They didn't hear this message. All they heard was their opposition message and messages from some of the African-American religious leaders who also opposed the ordinance.
Eventually, it came down to an interpretation about access to bathrooms. Opponents claimed allowing transgender men and women would let sexual predators to use women's restrooms, something Prop 1 supporters called fear-mongering.
It's very easy when all you sell is fear. People are afraid and they don't get to stop and think about logically, what are we really talking about?
But in the end, the message that got across to voters rested in the bathroom. Houston's mayor and HERO supporters say their fight isn't over.
School board elections usually aren't a big driver of voters to the polls, but in Fairfax County, Virginia, it was this time around. The reason? In May, school board members voted to include transgender lessons as part of its non-discrimination policy, against the will of many parents in the district. And Judicial Watch, a conservative nonpartisan watch group, learned that the school district began implementing the policy changes to accommodate transgender students even before voting on the policy.
Oh, it's clear, even in the records we've gotten so far, that they were off and running, that this was an objective of theirs, that they were acting on and attempting to line up before any vote was ever taken. They were going to push this through no matter what.
They're cramming an agenda, their own agenda, down parents' throats. We have no voice. We have a voice and they don't want to listen to us. They've ignored us. So the time has come to change that.
To the book of Revelations about Americans and religion.
There are some interesting findings in a report today from Pew Research. For one thing, the number of Americans who say they are absolutely certain God exists has fallen over the past 7 years from 71% to 63%. More now from John Blackstone.
In North Hollywood, California, Alex McHale says she fulfills her spiritual needs at a yoga studio.
To be in the state that you're in.
Like many people aged 19 to 25, she no longer goes to church.
Most of my friends, and when most I mean like all except for my boyfriend, don't go to church anymore.
In fact, only 28% of her age group go to services weekly. But not necessarily saying, well, there's not something out there.
Absolutely not. It's more of like, I hear so many people that are like, I believe there's a God, I just don't think there's a hell.
Since the survey was first taken in 2007, there has also been a decline in the number of Americans who describe themselves as being affiliated with a religion, from 83% in 2007 to 77% in this survey.
It was the night of the living dead in Venezuela as a horde of zombies took to the streets of Caracas for Halloween. Hundreds of adults, teens and children completed a 3-mile zombie walk, staggering through the Venezuelan capital in full costume. There was plenty of fake blood and gore, with zombie brides, grooms and pregnant women. Halloween has been politicized in Venezuela after Hugo Chavez called for a ban on the event in 2005. The former leader called Halloween a U.S. custom that attempts to frighten in the same way Washington's policies do to other countries. Participants in the zombie walk were mindful of the foreign significance of the date, but still wanted to go out and have a good time anyway.
This year, instead of doing it for Halloween, we're doing it for people who are just lovers of horror. I brought my 2 sisters with me. The entire family can come and have a good time together. So it's always a fun family event that regrettably these days there aren't many of.
Similar zombie events take place in other countries on Halloween, including Germany, Mexico and the United States.
These performers take the shock factor to another level. You really have to see it to believe it. This is the Circus of Horrors, where the show is as much intriguing as it is scary. This year marks its 21st birthday, with a special something for anyone who dares watch.
The word horror is a negative word, but they'll go out of here feeling really positive, because it's a real feel-good factor show. It's quite surprising. We have all this scary stuff, but we counterbalance it. It's always very funny as well. It's definitely as funny as it is scary. It's certainly performed with a forked tongue firmly in each cheek.
But how does someone make a career in the circus?
As a singer first, I got offered the job, and then found out I could fit in the bottle, so they put me in the bottle.
I couldn't put hula hoops down. So after finishing my college course, I really pursued the hula hooping. I've been in the industry been working for about 4 or 5 years now.
One thing's for sure, it's best to leave the playing with fire to the professionals. From the weird to the wacky, this performance certainly isn't for the faint-hearted.